I think the thing that I was aware of and have been aware of during this 24-hour marathon is that if we suddenly announced, in the way that we discovered COVID, that all over the world, out of us, all of a sudden, like COVID happened all of a sudden all over the world, if afresh, all of a sudden, we heard women were being raped here, women were being beaten here, women were being murdered here, all over the world would go into seismic shock. But because we're so used to it, you can hear those statistics that Annie has just reeled out, and you think, oh, I see, that's what we call normal. That's what the societies have allowed to be normal. And if you suddenly think, actually, take stock, that is as much as an epidemic as anything that COVID brings on us. It is a terrifying example of the allowance that girls and women don't matter enough to have even the basic level of security and safety in any country in the world. So although we had 6 themes as this 24-hour debate rolled around the planet, certainly violence is an underpinning issue in all of the themes. The idea that women are not worth protecting. And I think that's a very chilling thing for us all to consider. I'm going to come now to 2 extraordinary women who, as well, there's no non-extraordinary women that have been part of this 24-hour marathon. But let me turn first to Senator Sherry Rehman, who's the parliamentary leader of the Pakistan People's Party in Senate, as well as the party's vice president. She's identified as one of the top global thinkers of 2011 by Foreign Policy magazine. She's the cover title of Newsweek Pakistan as Pakistan's most important woman. So, Senator Sherry Rehman, are you there? For a most
I'm
important,
right here.
I know that you hold that importance very lightly. You're informal. You're very available to people, and and you share this idea that girls and women like ourselves need to come keep our feet on the earth and take our privileges and use them to speak on behalf of those who have less opportunity and less power. So I'm interested, Sherry, at this point in time in Pakistan, when you look at these themes that the WOW team chose, which of those came closest to your heart in terms of what you're seeing happening in your own country, and as a world leader, what you think that we need to care about?
Thank you, Jude, and thank you, Wow, for doing this and bringing us together. Really inspiring to hear just even your prologue right now. Yes, anger is going to lead to activism, that it always does. So this is how women channel what are known as broadcast as negative emotions into resilient and reformative action, I feel. Now, the themes you're talking about, when I heard them, they're all actually, as you said, interconnected. But what's jumping out in current experience in Pakistan, in this entire existential reset of values, lives, work, everything, and of course, we've seen the Black Lives Matter raging in the other part of the world. All of these, I think, ties into the search for justice and equity for women. And in this whole episode, as Annie Lennox so profoundly spoke about, I mean, so passionately spoke about domestic violence, none of us can walk away from that. It has reemerged as a monster, literally, with a new face, and needs that light shone on it, both in countries and communities and homes and globally. But what's obviously, we all know that women have become confined, they can't connect, and particularly of great pathos is the fact that in Pakistan, only 17 to 20% have active access to the internet, which is what is connecting us, which is where our privilege is taking us. And I'm able to draw inspiration from both your stories or Annie's message, but most of the women are not. They have very little access also to outside reporting. So what I've been working on particularly is what's been bothering me is the demographic and the data, the silent demographic and the silent epidemic, because all of this is not being reported. It's like an iceberg, which you can only see a very thin sliver at the top. What's happening, what's lying beneath is dark, it's confined, it's mixed up with shame and a slew of other social constructs imposed on women by society, and they're not reporting it. So rape and domestic violence is being reported even less. And here, just a small, the only demographic I have to hang on to, for instance, in these days when we're completely in lockdown, is that of we have a human rights ministry helpline in every area, and cumulatively, and these are not many, they get 40,000 calls a month on an average. Well, guess what? That has shrunk to. Gender-based violence calls have shrunk to literally 13 calls, 1 3, as opposed to 40,000 in a month. And that 40,000 is, I would suggest you, not even 1% of the tip. Uh, because if you say that in UK, 4 out of or 3 out of 5 women are experiencing domestic violence, well, here there's, and in South Asian societies, there is great impunity. Have you heard the rape figures for New Delhi? We may only, just because of population, be a little less. The point is, this is it's the hidden disappearing demographic. It's been, women have become the disappearing demographic in this pandemic. This is how we have experienced it. While some of us have remained on television, been able to access parliament and forums such as this, most women have actually lost their voices, and I worry about reversal of important gains. Here we were trying to work on documenting the all the unpaid daycare and other work women do, just the care work women do all over the world and in Pakistan. It just goes undocumented. So I feel that's gone up. 74 million women are working in the informal sector, and they're barely documented, 52% in Pakistan, or more, 78% rather. But they have no access right now to very often their incomes, which gave them a little bit of power in their homes and their communities and ability to affect decision making. And the other peril that women are facing, other than domestic violence, is really one that's very banal, but it is of healthcare access, healthcare advice. We have one of the world's largest primary healthcare systems in the world that reaches out to women at home, and it's based on women health workers, made by Benazir Bhutto, who you may have heard of. And and the point here was these women had even become polio vaccinators. They were holding up literally the backbone of our support system, of our healthcare system. Now, when there's a reproductive healthcare crisis, or even access to water or knowledge, you tell me, how are women at the bottom of, and even the middle of this pyramid, struggling to even understand what they must do in a global pandemic, what social distancing means, what they must do to protect themselves and their families. So that's been a struggle. And I've literally been working on two things. One is impunity for police, where most of our rapes are reported. That's where we hinge on domestic violence. My law also used to always break at the point where you say, all right, we report it at the police station. Obviously, they're the actors. And South Asian police is notorious for actually exploiting and abusing not just women, but everyone, many people. There's high percentages in custodial lockup. So I've decided to move a bill, which has passed Senate. It's called criminalizing torture and sexual harassment in custody. Obviously, sexual and all other abuse include. So that's an uphill task, but that's getting us to the impunity problem. That's getting us to another tip of the iceberg, to the gate, if you like, where we open up more cases and where we open up more challenges. The other thing I've been working on is hand washing for women, because 54% of Pakistanis don't have access to running fresh water. We'll be water scarce in 2025. And this is a global rush affecting us. This is a big drought effect. So what we're doing is trying to set up community wash basins, if you like, where philanthropy and the state both work together to provide water. And I made a video, a sort of hand washing video at the beginning of this pyramid, of this pandemic rather, to which was broadcast very. I'm grateful it was broadcast by many television channels on their own to teach people and women the value of simple hygiene provisions and how they can actually keep them and their women and their families safe from such kind. That's the only low cost kind of tool we have because our healthcare systems are under pressure. 70% of our healthcare workers are nurses, are the frontline workers are women. They have very little protection, and so most of us who have access to the internet, including celebrities, have gotten together to make sure that the PPE kits and all that are provided. So we're very much at a stage where we're still in a terrible lockdown, and we're not even at our peak. So Pakistan is at a trajectory when one of the worst squeeze on women and vulnerable communities as well as minorities is in play, and we're having to pull a lot of hats out of the box, both innovation and otherwise, to reach out without transmission fears and with COVID protocols in place and SOPs in place. So it's been a challenge, but it's certainly a time to rethink, build resilience, and reset our narratives, as you say, on what is the new normal. This can't be normal, but you're right, it's completely normalized. We're all living with that statistic, these horrible demographics.
Yeah. So, Sherry, you've painted a very expansive and important picture there of a number of things. First of all, the huge disparity between those who are privileged to have digital access and those who haven't. And that remains an enormous problem for the world. And then secondly, even those who have that access may be coerced and controlled to the degree where they don't have the ability to use it, to seek help, to get independence. The diminishing of the number of calls from 40,000 to 13 is a terrifying example that in lockdown, actually women are silenced and disallowed from being able to reach out and seek help. And yet, it was entirely predictable. Governments could have known this was going to happen and could have put something in place early. And then, of course, the hand washing just relates to the fact that as you've pointed out, in rural communities and communities that have very little communication from government of an easy transferable way, then the very basic ways of keeping safe have to be helped and understood. So I applaud the scale of the work, but it would be wrong if we kind of ever listening to this thought, well, the problems are in Pakistan or the problems are in Libya. The problems of women's vulnerability are absolutely global and relate to the idea that in the end, women don't mean as much as men have. They don't mean as much economically. They don't mean as much in terms of their safety. That their healthcare doesn't mean as much. In that respect, we, as you said at the very beginning, we need to understand that women don't have justice. So, Minna Salami, you are the author of Sensuous Knowledge, a beautiful title, A Sensuous Knowledge, a Black Feminist Approach for Everyone. I know that you're an actor and activist, and you're the founder of the multiple award-winning feminist blog, Ms. Afropolitan. I wonder, sitting in the UK as you do, and watching the UK being one of the places that has really had a very calamitous relationship with COVID in terms of the number of deaths, the uncertainty of communication, the schools still not being able to go back, women not being able to pursue their careers again, or their part-time jobs or their multiple jobs because of the responsibility of childcare. What have you felt about the 6 issues? Which have you felt that we have to think about most carefully?
Thank you, Jude, and wow for inviting me to this festival. But thank you above all for putting it together. It sends such a strong statement that women's voices won't be silenced anymore because we have precisely because all of these issues are being exposed and made visible in very pertinent ways. all of the themes are super important, as Sherry and everybody has been emphasizing. But I would choose the topics of justice and education and the economy as being of central importance. Justice, because from the moment that a girl is born, she isn't born into a world of opportunity and possibility. Instead, she's born into a world where, as you just alluded to, her value is lesser than that of the value of a boy child. And this is the same wherever in the world that a girl is born, in the West, in the global South, in all parts of the world. It is just that patriarchal oppression takes different forms and has varying degrees. And so what this means is that from the first breath of a girl child, the question of justice is of central importance. And it must therefore also be something that the feminist movement and women's rights efforts and organizations continue to really center in everything that we do, whatever issue we might be looking at, whether it is COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, the two big ones that have happened this year. But constantly, the question of justice is one that is fundamental to feminist work. The second topic that I would choose is education, because again, this is something that is so central to women's emancipation and liberation. And of course, education has always been of urgent importance for feminist work. But I would say that it is important in unprecedented ways in our times, because we live in such contradicting and confusing times as we are bearing witness to at the moment. You know, there's this simultaneous awakening happening, as well as regression. So all our societies are going backwards at such a rapid speed, and it's really a mess. But at the same time, you see people becoming more conscious and aware of the problems that we face. And in this kind of societal environment, the question of education takes on a bit of a different shape. And I think we really need to be we need to be asking, what does a feminist education look like? Because in the past, we have traditionally, within the women's rights movement, we have focused on, gaining access, girls gaining access to education, which of course we have to continue to do in the first place. But then also we have also focused on kind of reforming educational curricula, and even that is still lagging far behind. But the thing is that in these times, we need to, in addition, place an emphasis on what a feminist education is. And when we ask that question, it starts to become clear that in these unprecedentedly contradictory, confusing times, what we need to equip girls with from as early as possible is clarity and groundedness, because the people who are going to shape the present and the future are people who can make sense, who can kind of get a feel and start to shape the society that we live in. So education is really, really important in the work that I do, and I think should be for all feminist work. And the last topic that I would choose is the economy. And the reason for that is because the economy, I mean, first of all, like every human being on this planet should have access to a living wage at minimum. And what happens is that if women have access to a minimum income at least, then they will automatically take care of they will work toward the solving of the remaining three issues that we've been raising throughout the festival, which are violence, climate, and health. Because when women have access to money, they tend to connect and look after Earth in more than men do, as we have seen evidenced throughout history. Women who have access to financial safety of some degree are more likely to step away from violent situations, whether that is abusive relationships with their family, with their spouses, or even with their state. And they also are likely to use that financial power, if you like, to assist other women to step away from violence. And lastly, and obviously, women who have access to money have better health. So it's a kind of evil cycle, because if you don't have money, your health suffers from it, as we have seen. The poorest in societies are suffering the most from COVID-19. But then also, if you don't have access to money, you can't get adequate health care. And actually, last but not least, by any means, just the question of poverty is obviously connected to the question of the economy. And I think that is actually the most pressing issue that the world faces today. There is no justification for how much poverty there still is in this day and age, when everyone could have access to at least to food and minimum wage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I think that what is so clear, and is that by doing this 24-hour marathon right around the world and hearing over and over again, as I said, the same stories, the same story of social injustice, economic injustice, health injustice, education deprivation, violence, you can see that if we'd had equality, and then suddenly we reduced 50% of the world's population's ability to have justice. If you reversed it and said, we're suddenly going to remove all these rights, then obviously there would be an absolute revolution immediately. But because we're used to it, because it's been embedded for thousands of years in the idea that men's rights count and women's rights have to be slowly won and can be conditional and taken away, then we've let an awful lot of things become our norm. And the exciting thing about this moment is the revelation that COVID has given everybody is inescapable. And so I'm seeing women who have enormous power and women who have no power for the first time uniting and saying, we're not going to be scared into not naming this stuff. We're not going to be nice. We're not going to be polite. And we're not going to sort of beat around the bush. We're going to own this together. And I think this could be a massive moment of change. Well, it's got to be. And I want to bring you both together at this point to talk about Black Lives Matter. Because what Black Lives Matter has done, let's face it, Black Lives Matter isn't an immediate, it hasn't sprung out of COVID. It was already in play. It was already part of a civil rights conversation that's gone on for a very long time, but lit afresh at this moment. And in such an inspirational and vivid way. But in order that it takes fire right across the world, which I think it has done, and in order that it forms as an inspiration for other acts of calling out what needs to be changed, I think the whole world needs to understand the impact it's having in countries that are not just obviously dominated or have been dominated by white power. So, Sherry, I wanted to come to you first about the Black Lives Matter movement and what the impact is in Pakistan, because I think people can be under the illusion that somehow if the country is full of brown people or full of black people, that somehow the impact of white people hasn't made its play. But of course that's ridiculous because of colonialism, because of all kinds of things. So can you talk about the impact of Black Lives Matter and what's happening in Pakistan?
Yes, actually, Jude, it's been quite. It's had an impact on what I would say the people who are able to read, write, and watch some element of TV, which is quite a lot of Pakistan, and it's played out on television as a global spark that could actually, whether they're Black lives or not, it could lead to all indignity and mistreatment of vulnerable communities, because that's what Black Lives really is about, the constant mistreatment and discrimination and the otherization of one people based on skin or race. And while there's no caste or race stratification in Pakistan, there's a whole lot of post-colonial color filters that apply to people judging where you're from, what you can do, and what access to benefits or opportunities you have in society. For instance, there's been, and BLM has become kind of a poster child for protecting the vulnerable here. And you've had, even amongst the, what I would say, the companies that promote whitening products, for instance, and that's something that South Asian women have had to grapple with for years. It's peculiar to South Asia, where you're considered a bad marriage prospect. If you're my skin color, you need to be much whiter, for instance. And so stuff like that goes on. And there are Unilever, which is a big global giant, has just had to change or consider changing the product called Fair and Lovely. It's a whitening cream, which is this pigmenting cream. It's dangerous to my mind to skin and to not just physically, but every which way, has been around on the market as a bestseller, as an indication of what what filters we apply as a society to the issue of color. And that's really been it's brought these conversations front and center. There was a commercial for a whitening cream being peddled by one of the Martha Stewart's cooking sort of domestic goddesses. And I just called it out. I said, why are you peddling a whitening cream? What message are you giving the women and girls, and everybody, the men of Pakistan? What are you telling us? So that was removed, and today I just heard that Unilever is considering changing the name and branding and composition of this product, which is their biggest seller apparently. And that should just tell you what kind of filters we apply when we just look at people. So Black Lives Matter has resonated very strongly in South Asia, particularly among women and girls who have to constantly face this kind of, oh, but you're from the south, you're not of Caucasian skin. Basically, that's what, because the north is of our country. It's like that. And so the blue, the model looks are constantly peddled and valorized as the ideal, as the prettification ideal, if you like. And that in itself has various layers of complication and injustice built into that. So that has had an impact, and people are unpacking this kind of view, calling it out, and bringing big corporate giants down to change.
And I have to say that the corporates, and this is what I mean about powerful voices making change. What I see happening is that some of the corporates, and I'll just call Bloomberg and Mastercard and Moody's, who've been sponsoring this 24 hours, they've actually said, we're up for these bold conversations. We want to be part of change. We'll put our power behind change. We won't stand by and see injustice. When we are part of that problem, we'll do our best to change it. And again, I've never heard that clarity before, of grassroots combining with powerful voices in this way. I mean, Mina, obviously, you're from the UK, I'm from the UK, and we're always being told that, oh, it's different in the UK from the US, for example, in terms of police violence, in terms of institutional racism, and so on. But I mean, actually, all the evidence is that it's hard baked into our system in just the same way. We might not have guns on the street in the same way. We might not have the same exact history, but we have huge amounts of implicit violence within our attitudes to colour. Tell me what you feel is happening now for the Black Lives Matter movement and its impact on the UK.
Well, Jude, I think that this is a diversion tactic in many ways, because whenever the question of race is about to make some significant kind of progress, obviously this is a huge momentum, unlike one we've witnessed in recent times. But even the smallest indication that something might change, I find that particular dialogue always reemerges. That this isn't an issue that is valid in the UK. And then what happens is that those of us who have been working on Black liberation for years and decades have to expend so much energy into trying to, prove the obvious. I mean, the UK is the former empire was a colonizer. Obviously, even with just what has happened this year with COVID, we've seen that Black people have been the worst affected, and this obviously is not because of their skin color or their history or anything like that. It is because of discrimination. And so what I would like to say about Black Lives Matter and this specific moment in which it is happening is, first of all, that I think we need to be really vigilant. So while I feel hopeful and optimistic, and I think this is unprecedented, and there is a shift happening, and we need to really emphasize that, because that motivates and encourages people to move forward. But we have to be so vigilant, because whenever these moments have occurred in history, the big shifts, the abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement in the 60s, what happens is that we are kind of given a bit of freedom. We're given this sense that what we're demanding is something that we're going to receive. But then, other laws are put into place. So with the abolition of slavery, suddenly, you had to work for your freedom, and all kinds of really oppressive laws then remained. And with the civil rights movement, it was followed by the war on drugs and all of these kinds of things. So we need to really pay attention to what is happening to counteract this sense of transformation. And the other thing that we have to pay attention to is gender and class within this movement, because obviously there's an emphasis on the race issue. It's called Black Lives Matter. It started because of racial discrimination. But where are women's stories in this? And I don't just mean the women who are being discriminated against, but women's voices, women's relationships between Black women and white women. Those are not the kinds of questions that are at the forefront at the moment. It is quite male-centric, in the same way that, say, the Me Too moment was Eurocentric. And so we need to pay attention to bringing women's stories, and then also to looking at how so much of the issue, as Sherry pointed to, even in Pakistan, is actually a class issue. And why is it that Black people all around the world, in every society, are so much more disenfranchised financially, socially, economically, politically, across the board. So really, in order to move towards societies where we can thrive and where we can be elevated, I think we need to keep our focus on the depth of the issue, while also going out on the streets and demanding change.
Okay, that's wise. Drama is exciting, but drama has to be replaced by hard work. This moment of change for Black Lives Matter has come out of very, very hard work by many, many organisers over many years. It isn't just a spontaneous eruption. And if it's going to carry on, then everybody has to decide that they're going to be shoulder to shoulder to make change happen. And I'm speaking as a white cisgendered woman of in my 60s. The amount of unlearning I've had to do from a history I was taught that wasn't a true history, wasn't a reflective history of human justice, requires me to just be at that work all the time. And I know that one of the things that we feel at WOW as a community across the globe is that we have to make everybody's issue our issue. I am not yet a disabled woman, but if I live long enough, I'm likely to be, as disability comes with infirmity of age. And so why would I not care now about disability? But then that's just like about my own future. And it has to be more than it might happen to me. It has to be actually because in the end, we want to live in a society together that is just and equitable. And so having each other's backs, calling out the problems for each other, and not asking each group to do all its own work all by itself to solve those problems. But I will say at this moment that there's some pretty courageous stuff happening. I mean, Sherry, you're not the only state to be saying we need to address the systematic racism and the systematic injustice within police forces. People are saying the economic systems are so biased against women, that has to be reformed. And Sandy Akora from the World Bank was saying that we have this huge fiscal opportunity from all over the world, and yet it's not being treated through a gender lens. So I'm hearing voices of change making at quite a radical level now. And that is something that should give us optimism because, well, as far as I'm concerned, women, there's no going back from this point. We've got to keep on the move.